They are here, we have Ascension Day, the Tyranids have come to liberate us and replace the brutal oppressive regime with one of enlightenment and democracy. Called it. Every Genestealer cultist longs to witness the arrival of the Star Children and then ascend to join them in blessed oneness. This will be a transcendent experience, a sublime reward for their devotion, or so they believe. The reality is altogether more hideous. As the Tyranids approach, the utterly alien hive mind assimilates the more nuanced brood mind of the cult, that is like the Patriarch and the pure strain Genestealers. Many of the faithful die from psionic shock, while others are freed from Tyranid mind control only to go mad with horror as the truth is revealed. The rest become short-lived puppets for the first waves of vanguard Tyranid organisms descending on their world. This is their story. Exerting its will to make them fight harder and move faster, the hive mind swiftly burns out those who survive, harvesting each flicker of bioenergy to reinvigorate its more valuable Tyranid organisms. That is less ideal. Spoilers much, Games Workshop. But Games Workshop has been leaking so much, they leaked the days of events in December. The 24th of December is apparently Christmas Eve, and the 25th will be Christmas Day. Crazy stuff. If you know any more leaked dates this month, let me know. So what do the Genestealer Cult do as the Star Gods are revealed and are also here? We could flee, but that would propagate more monsters across the stars, or we can accept that our religion was stupid but commit to the bit. The final day is here, and if you can't find it, I've linked the detachment in the description. Next to the "Here, have some tip money for Christmas as thanks for all you've done this year" button. That's the Ko-fi link. The Detachment Rule has a lot of parts to it. It is kind of messy to read, but it's good. With the Star Children's blessing, up to half of your army can be from the Tyranids Codex. It's great to see a combination of the two armies on the tabletop in 10th edition, but, with some limits. Tyranids cannot be your warlord. If you have a Patriarch, remember that they have to be the warlord. Genestealer Cult do not have the Tyranid keyword. Their shared keyword is Great Devourer, which does not come up in this detachment. You can only include Tyranids Vanguard Invader units, but no aircraft, or Broodlord, or Genestealers. I know you want 60 Genestealers from the two different codices, but it isn't allowed. You can have Death Leaper, Lictors, the Ryans, Neurolictors, the Tunneling Trigon, Raveners, and Morlock, and the Flying Winged Hive Tyrant, Winged Tyranid Prime, Gargoyles, the Parasite of Mortrex, and a Tyrannocyte drop pod which can still contain another one of itself. Infinitely. What is and isn't a Vanguard Invader keyword unit changes as Games Workshop tries to balance the Tyranids Codex. Last edition the Necron Codex came out very early and was very limited in its keywords, but by the end of the edition, almost everything had the core keyword. The first big part of the Detachment Rule is psionic parasitism. With each tug on the synaptic leash, the hive mind drains more of its hapless worshippers. The erotica writes itself. Tyranid synapse units can drain Genestealer Cult units to replenish a nearby Tyranid unit's health. It can choose to replenish itself. You can't drain pure strains or the Patriarch as they have thematically switched over to the Tyranid side, but they don't get the Tyranid keyword. They are still Genestealer Cult. And they're not synapse, so won't be doing any draining of their own. That would be like having children just in case you needed a new kidney. So a Genestealer Cult unit, almost any unit, it could be trucks or rock grinders, they have a lot of tasty wounds. They are within 9 inches and visible to a Tyranid synapse unit. The Genestealer Cult unit takes D3 plus 1 mortal wounds, and one injured model in the Tyranid synapse unit or another Tyranid unit within 9 inches of the synapse unit and visible to that synapse unit regains the same number of wounds that the Genestealer Cult lost, and from doing this they also gain +1 to hit on all of their attacks. A lot of the Tyranid units you can take here are multi-wound or have lots of wound, which makes this valuable for them. You don't regain models worth of wounds, so you won't get any gargoyles back. But turning some toughness 3 5+ save bodies into wounds for a toughness 10 3+ save Morlock is rather handy. The rule specifies friendly Genestealer Cult units, so if you were fighting against the resistance that did not want to be eaten and hoped to survive, well, your mad dreams die today! On the final day. But you couldn't suck up enemy Genestealer Cult models to regenerate your Tyranids. Something you can do with the Chaos Knights as they do not specify stepping on friendly damned units. Uh-oh. This is an ability of Synapse keyword units, not Synapse faction rule Tyranids. Synapse and Shadow in the Warp do not apply. Both those abilities state that they only work if your army faction is Tyranids, and your army faction has to be Genestealer Cult to use this detachment. So which units do we have access to with the Synapse keyword? That is the Winged Tyrant, the Winged Tyranid Prime, the Parasite of Mortrex, which is not an epic hero, and the Neurolictor. The Winged Tyrant with 10 wounds is a good choice for someone who just wants to heal themselves. For targets of this draining ability, Neophytes are good because they can recycle and sort of self-heal with the cult icon, although that would only happen in your next command phase, and this draining happens in the movement phase. Tanks have a lot of wounds to draw on. Aberrants and Metamorphs or units with an icon ward have a feel no pain. From the wording, it is wounds lost, not the dice number rolled for the number of mortal wounds. So they are bad choices as they will reduce the number of wounds that you heal. Synapse creatures are optional to include in the army, but you want them for the Detachment Rule. They don't get a lot out of the +1 to hit, because guess what? Those 4 Synapse models already hit on a 2+ with all of their attacks. It would help gargoyles attached to a Wing Prime, they could use the +1 to hit, otherwise you need to have your Synapse creature near to something like the Ryans who could heal an injured model, and then the Ryans would get +1 to hit. Thankfully we have another +1 to hit, with Part 2, Catalyst. This is an aura from all Tyranids in the army, all of them. Enemies within 6 inches of the Tyranid units that are then targeted by your Genestealer Cult units. Those Genestealer Cult units have +1 to hit. So this is not Tyranids escorting Genestealer Cult units and an aura on them, it is an aura that lights up enemy units. Move blocking becomes even more powerful. Infiltrating Lictors or von Ryan Leapers could convey it from the start of the game. Move close to the enemy, everything within range is now lit up. You could charge an enemy tank with some Tyranids, and then you can shoot that tank with the -1 to hit from Big Guns Never Tire being counted out. Your speedy Ridge Runners can attack vehicles with big lasers much better, or nearby enemies to Tyranid units could get hit by the Ridge Runner mortar, and the -1 to hit from firing indirectly is counteracted, and we want to hit to convey the crossfire special rule of that unit. Then another Genestealer Cult unit attacks that unlucky enemy at +1 to hit, and with an extra point of armor penetration. For shooting it isn't that impressive, but the Catalyst rule also works in combat. Take that, Brood Brothers Auxilia. Acolytes or Metamorphs being carried by a truck could get to charge out at something, also fighting a Lictor, or throw some gargoyles in there first, and then charge in with the Acolytes. The Genestealer Cult unit is hitting on a 2+. That is an improvement. That is a very nice improvement. Hold that idea for the enhancements. With Inhuman Integration, you also get sustained hits on a Genestealer Cult unit, but only while targeting a unit within 6 inches of the Tyranids. 6 inches is short, despite what anyone may have heard otherwise. It is for engagement range, and because this is situational, you have to engender a scenario to use it. You could have a Biophagus and Metamorphs in a truck for protection. They get out and charge a unit that is in engagement range of a Tyranid unit. Your Metamorphs now have sustained hits and lethal hits from the Biophagus and +1 to hit. Effective. Or Enhancer Primus for the rerolls to hit. You don't get lethal hits, but when you are hitting on a 2+, you can safely reroll all of the dice that aren't 6s to try for more sustained hits. 20 points sounds about right for this enhancement. With Enraptured Damnation, which I like, you cannot shoot me with Overwatch. 10 points of yes. I'll put that on a Patriarch and Pure Strains because the Patriarch, compared to the Index, is no longer an epic hero, so they can take enhancements. Even though the Tyranids are here, you can still only have one Patriarch. The Patriarch and Pure Strains I'm putting in front of the enemy unit with the best Overwatch. Infernus Marines, Dominions with Flamers, anything with Torrent, a unit like that. A Primus can redeploy me if necessary. I hate Overwatch as a Genestealer Cult player, and I hate being set on fire, generally. Now we have a unit that can kill off that threat to the rest of my army. Genestealer Cult don't smash enemies to pieces. We have to target the biggest threats to our force and deal with them so that they can't interfere with our other units completing primary and secondary missions. Any tool that makes our Scalpel unit sharper is a plus. There are 2 enhancements I would want on a Winged Tyrant. One of them has to be on a Winged Tyrant. I can have 2 Winged Tyrants. Vanguard Tyrant is +1 strength and AP on melee weapons. Killing tanks is hard for the Genestealer Cult. A monstrous bone sword and lash whip at strength 10 is getting to the good number, and with twin linked to re-roll the wound roll and now enough AP to matter, we can really smash tanks. If the Winged Hive Tyrant gets hurt, like a health drop in video games, we can deep strike in some neophytes to eat. You can eat them better with Synaptic Auger. The neophytes have to be 9 inches away from enemies, but want to be within 9 inches of the synapse creature. This is manageable. The same number of neophytes die, but you get twice the nutrients. I know you may want this on a Trigon, but only characters can have enhancements. The enhancements work with the Detachment Rule. I like that, and the Detachment Rule is good if you can get your positioning right and have Tyranids paired up with Genestealer Cult units. So you fight in pairs, and the Stratagems encourage this. With Hyper Ferocity, a Genestealer Cult unit rerolls wound rolls of 1 in the fight phase. Okay, good alone on the turn you activate the Biophagus' +1 to wound against infantry, and the Metamorphs can now wound toughness 4 enemies on a 2+, rerolling 1s. But there's more. If friendly Tyranids are within 6 inches of that enemy, yes, friendly is a relative term at this point, but then you get +1 to hit from Catalyst in the Detachment Rule, and your unit of Metamorphs fully reroll the wound roll. Doesn't have to be Metamorphs. So Pure Strain Genestealers and a Patriarch, the giver of devastating wounds, charge first turn alongside an infiltrating Lictor. The Pure Strains hit on a 2+, even if the enemy had a -1 to hit ability, and then reroll all wound rolls to get as many 6s as possible. Reroll wounds on devastating wounds is a good combination. I have torn tanks apart with Genestealers before. I have also not done that. I'll explain later. Psi Surge is used at the start of any phase, so don't worry if you forgot to use it in the command phase and realize in the shooting phase that the hated enemy unit is just out of 6 inches. You can extend the range to 9 inches. That is a size to be proud of. It lasts until your next command phase and can't be active on more than 1 unit at a time. If you need +1 to hit, this is a big aura, 9 inches in all directions. Doesn't have to be a Synapse Tyranid unit, it's any Tyranid unit. It wouldn't modify the second part of Hyperferocity as that specifies 6 inches to the enemy unit and isn't about Catalyst. The Stratagems are not all about the Genestealer Cult. The Tyranids get to shine. They can fall back and shoot and charge with darting attacks, and you use it in the shooting phase or the charge phase so you can decide when or if you want to go in, unlike similar stratagems that have to be used in the movement phase when you fall back. The Von Ryans have fight first, but other Tyranids can have it by falling back and charging back in. When you charge, you fight first. The Tyranids charge first, and then Divine Imperative, a wonderful stratagem that really puts the Biosanctic Brood Surge to shame. A Tyranid unit is in combat, like a Trigon, a unit that's hard to kill in one fight phase. The Genestealer Cult units come to the rescue. If you charge an enemy unit within engagement range of a Tyranid unit, you add 1 to the charge roll and re-roll the charge roll. Aberrant's coming from Deep Strike on an 8-inch re-rollable charge, or something squishier like Acolytes or Metamorphs. Wonderful. These are all good stratagems. Resistance Tunnels puts the Host of Ascension to shame. Unlike Return to the Shadows, you don't have to get shot to go down. You go back into reserves, down and up. I know people call it uppy downy because you take the models up off the board and then put them back down on the board later, but since we're going underground it feels more appropriate as down and then up. Genestealer Cult units get to where they need to be to complete missions, and the Morlocks Deep Strike again as a returning terror from the deep. If you didn't get to heal the Morlock and it died, that sucks, nothing you can do. If one of the Tyranid character creatures died, avenge them. Now it's the Xenocreed's vengeance of the Martyr getting shamed. All Genestealer Cult units attacking the responsible unit have +1 to hit and +1 to wound for the rest of the game. That helps. It's only in the fight phase or your opponent's shooting phase, so if they were killed by mortal wounds on the charge from Assault Marines in the charge phase, or by Overwatch, you can't use this stratagem. In that regard, it is no better or worse than Vengeance for the Martyr. The stratagems for other Genestealer Cult detachments have at least one dud because they worked off an older version of Cult Ambush. Why do we need Downtrodden Rise to have a unit in Cult Ambush come on from strategic reserves when we can already do that for free with the December 2024 Cult Ambush rule? This is a nice mix of lots of things. Lots of the detachments are in here, and also some Tyranids. At times, Final Day feels like a Tyranid detachment with some Genestealer Cult, when we are at max allowed 50% of our army to be Tyranids. The Tyranids do a lot of work while the Genestealer Cult provide the bodies for medipacks and complete primary and secondary missions. Hopefully this is not another case of feeling like the Genestealer Cult Codex was written from the point of view of an opponent of the Genestealer Cult. Like the original Cult Ambush was detailing the ways for the opponent of the Genestealer Cult to interact with it, not as an army rule for us to play with. This detachment does put the Brood Brothers to shame. The Brood Brothers can have +1 to hit in the shooting phase only. The Tyranids is +1 to hit all the time. It's fun. We don't know how competitive it will be, as you kind of have two halves of an army. The detachment rule tries to keep them playing off on one another, but you know what usually works better? Having a detachment rule for your whole army, or most of it. The Genestealer Cult detachments pick one part of the army to benefit. The deep striking units, the bikes and vehicles, aberrants and pure strains, but I find it weird that this is not a pure strain and patriarch detachment. They are now leading the cult, but from the Tyranid side. So you will have to figure out if you want to use this detachment or stick with ones in the Genestealer Cult Codex. Figure out how much pure strains or aberrants can smash with a +1 to hit in this detachment compared to an extra attack in the Biosanctic Brood Surge. So you could use Adept Roll to do that. It has direct import from Battlescribe, so you can bring the unit into the app easily. You can change the unit size, you can modify the attacks because it isn't fixed to just what's on the profile, and in the Biosanctic Brood Surge, aberrants get an extra attack on the charge. You could add an extra AP from Crossfire from a Ridge Runner. You could add a Biophagus profile, but let's just care about their ability to provide lethal hits. And you can calculate how good you would be against any enemy profile, and then you can see the average stats and how many casualties you are likely to cause. So next time your pure strains and patriarch charge an enemy tank, and you don't roll a single 6 to wound with 56 attacks, you don't need to ask, well, what are the odds of that? You can find out with the Mathahmmer app. Link to download that is in the description. Here's a theoretical army list. With points so low on the Genestealer Cult units, army construction is like all of the Genestealer Cult models you own, and then keep proxying models until you have an army. Final Day and the Brood Brothers Auxiliary are good detachments for bringing in more actual models for the Genestealer Cult. But from the Warhammer community articles, this is an expensive army? I think they meant to say expansive. But that goes with page 20 of the core rules, that may send you into an engagement rage. On initial thoughts, I would keep the Genestealer Cult units to either be snacks for the Tyranids, or be our best combat units that you can pair up with the Tyranids. Synapse is a big part of this detachment because Tyranids. If the enemy can shoot the big ones, we lose our healing and +1 to hit on the Tyranid units. Neurolictors that have Lone Operative are good at staying alive and completing missions in safety. That's why I have 2 of them. The Winged Tyrant with Vanguard Tyrant is there to fly at an enemy tank and destroy it, and then do it again if possible. The Morlock is there to be healed by the Hive Tyrant, and with the resistance tunnels, it can come up and down and bite multiple times. But a lot of damage on several units is not as good as destroying one enemy unit. So maybe don't go back down, but charge into something. This will allow other units coming from reserve using Divine Imperative to get their charges to work. And I have 3 Von Ryans, which you can get in the Combat Patrol magazine if you're in the UK. They want to go near the Patriarch. Then the Ryans and the Patriarch and the Pure Strains want to charge immediately. The Patriarch is immune to Overwatch, so that the Pure Strain Genestealers can be rerolling all wound rolls with Hyper Ferocity and devastating wounds. The Primus is there to redeploy Genestealer Cult units. He starts in reserve, but there's no requirement on his ability that he has to be on the table to use it. He's with 10 Metamorphs, they are deep striking, they are the unit that's going to charge in and make a mess of things. I have 3 lots of 10 Neophytes, they have 3 jobs: sticky objectives, completing missions, and being a lunchbox for the Hive Tyrant. And I also have 5 acolytes with auto pistols so that they can mine the home objective and generate additional command points. You've seen how good our stratagems are, so we want more command points to use them. With this and the Brood Brothers Auxilia, all of our Cult Ambush Resurgence points are going to be spent on one side of the army. You have 10 Resurgence points at Strike Force level, but since I've gone for a 1500 point army, a nice size, a game size that I often play, I usually modify it to 8 Resurgence points just to match the scale. And I think it's being more polite to my opponent. This will give me all of the Metamorphs and 10 Neophytes, or all of the Pure Strains and 5 Acolytes. Whatever dies first, whatever you need more of, that's what you use the Resurgence points on. And then the Genestealer Cult get to play with the Tyranid units, and the Tyranids get to play with their food. We have problems with the detachment. Stuff that makes it a bit messier. Brood Brothers were part of Genestealer Cult in 8th edition and 9th edition, and the start of 10th edition, but they're not in the main codex. If you don't have Imperial Guard units, you can't really use that detachment. It's like the Drukarian Harlequins detachment. It looks cool, but it will only be played by a small number of people who have those models. Unless you had friends who allowed you to adapt them to be a competition between Cabalites and Witches, then it could work better and matches the lore and army collection. It's the same for Final Day. If you don't have Tyranid units in your collection, do you go out and buy some for a detachment that may only last in the rules for about a year? After buying the models and probably painting them, how many games will you get to play with them? Are you then expanding into a Tyranid army, which Games Workshop probably wants you to do? If you use the Games Workshop app, you can't see the stats for your Tyranid units unless you buy the Tyranids Codex. And the Codex book is outdated in some parts because of changes to what a Vanguard Invader unit is. I think this detachment is nice if you played in 8th edition and had some Tyranids back when the Allies rules were much looser. But I have a few Tyranids. So I will be playtesting this detachment to see what it can do, and then I will have a deep dive into how to play it. Adeptus Sororitas tomorrow, which apparently, according to comments online, has to save the Codex. Again. If you don't like this particular way of combining the Tyranids and Genestealer cults, I have another idea about how you can do it. My darlings and viewers, have a great day of 40k.